actually think we're good to go.
Yeah. Okay, let's do it.
Okay, so we are absolutely delighted to welcome you to the first in our webinar series designed specifically for researchers, called From Research to Publication, a Researcher's Guide to Open Access. Today, we are going to be covering why should I care about open access? And as Romy said, the webinar will be recorded and it's going to be available on the Kronos Hub website to view afterwards. So we very much designed this as a resource that you can use, you can maybe share with some of your colleagues to help them get to grips with open access too. We're also doing 3 more webinars in this series. So the next one will be on March the 31st, and that will be on article processing charges, also known as APCs. And you can sign up to the full suite of webinars on the Kronos Hub website, which is kronoshub.io, if you have not already. So I'll do a little bit of an introduction to the both of us today who'll be taking you through learning more about open access. I'm Laura Davidson. I am a customer care specialist at Kronos Hub. I've been working at the company for about a year now. I am also a PhD researcher, and prior to my role at Kronos Hub, I also worked as a lecturer in the UK. So I worked at universities in London for about 10 years. So I really started my open access learning journey then and then brought it to the company. And we work with researchers on a daily basis, which is why we really wanted to create this webinar for you today. Romy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Laura. So my name is Romy Beard. I'm the Publisher Relations Manager here at Kronos Hub, and I've worked in scholarly communications for the last 17 years. I worked at publisher, aggregators, technology companies, and in my previous role, worked a lot with open access as well and signed open access agreements with publishers for libraries and done some trainings on article processing charges and some other things we'll talk about today. And hopefully it won't bore you too much with the slides, but we'll also be interrupted with some great questions from Laura that she gets as a role in customer care. So hopefully that will jazz it up a little bit.
Absolutely, and we'll have some polls for you as well to answer, just to get to know you a little bit better and just to sort of gauge where you're at on the open access journey. Okay, so for today's agenda, we're going to be giving you a deeper insight into what is open access. We'll give you a bit of an insight into the basics of open access, so open access content versus paywalled content, publishing open access versus archiving open access, which is a really important thing to unpack, the different open access types, of which there are many that Romy will take you through, different journal types, and the different OA licenses. And we'll also be talking about the benefits of publishing open access, and we'll give you a lot of resources that you can take away to look at to learn more about open access. Okay, so the first poll, we would love to know, how much do you know about open access? So you should have a little pop-up come up on your screen. So there's, I know nothing, I know a little, would like to learn more. I know some, but I'm confused. And the final answer is, I'm an OA expert. So just give you a little bit of time to answer that. Just see the results coming through now.
I can't see them, but
yeah, I'll share them in a minute.
It's just
okay, so I think we can reveal the results now. Oh, there's some final votes coming in. Okay. All right. See the results. So hopefully you can see the results on your screen. Romy, can you see them?
Yes, I can see. So there's 18% have said, I know nothing. 50% said, I know a little, would like to learn more. 30% know some, but are confused. And 3% are OA experts. But that's kind of what we were hoping for. We expected most people to know something about open access. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't have signed up for the webinar at all, but it's really nice to get a bit of a sense of the audience. And hopefully for those that want to know more and those that are a little bit confused, hopefully we'll clarify things and not leave you more confused than to start with.
Great. I'll stop sharing that now.
Great.
Okay.
So to start with then, let's talk what is open access. I found this great definition on the openaccess.nl website that explains that open access is a broad international movement, and the main aim is to make sure research is openly available. There shouldn't be any financial, legal, or technical barriers to accessing open research. And it all started like over 20 years ago at the Budapest Declaration for Open Access. And we'll talk a little bit about different types of open access, but there's been recently more of an increase, especially in terms of German publications, and really a drive also from the funder side to make sure researchers publish in open access. And in our funder specific webinar, we'll talk in more detail about that. But on a very simple level then, open access aims to lift the barrier to accessing and reading research articles to make sure that anyone from around the world can read research freely without having any of those barriers. And to put that into context, we'll have a look at, first of all, a closed access article. So this is an article published in the journal Solar by Wiley. And we can already see here highlighted in blue that there is a technical barrier. If your library doesn't have a subscription, or even if your library has a subscription, you need to log into the online library with your institutional login, with a personal login. And there's also a financial barrier. If they don't have a subscription, you need to pay for, you can see here, 24-hour online access, $12. But even if your library has access, they have paid for it. So there's a financial barrier. And on the technical side, it can be very smooth if you have a subscription on how you can access these resources. And I'm sure you know this, Laura, from doing your own research. If you logged in through the VPN, it can be very smooth, but at times for some publishers, it's very cumbersome. There's a lot of hoops you have to jump through to be able to read. So it's definitely not as simple as an open access article where there are simply no barriers. And here is an example from the same journal, actually, with Wiley. And on the publisher's website, you can read the full text in HTML on the website, and you can also download the PDF as it would appear in a print version, and download this and read it later on your device, or read it online. So really easy to be able to read research literature. The other example we have here is of an article that has been archived in open access. So it's not the final PDF that's available, but I got access here through an institutional repository. And this is where you can archive a version of an article and then access it. Also, you can download the full text, which doesn't look like the final PDF, but it's still the full version of the article that you can read in an institutional repository. So I've mentioned already different versions of articles. So before we go any further, just want to make sure you understand what we're talking about, and we really try and make sure today not to throw lots of things at you and you go like confused about what's what. So there's 3 versions we'll be mentioning today. The submitted version, a little bit less so, but still thought it's worth explaining. That's the version that the author submits to the publisher system. It's literally the Word doc that you attach as an author when you do your submission and send it away. So no changes has been done to that. No one has actually read it. Then we've got the author accepted manuscript, the AAM, which is the version of the article that was accepted by the publisher before any final editing, before any layout or typesetting. And that's what you can see here on the left-hand side. And already there's a massive visual difference to the final version of record, the final PDF, which has got the typesetting, the layout, the logo of the journal, the logo of the publishing, some references and so on. So you can see visually what the difference is between those 2 versions. And we'll be referring to those a lot throughout the webinar. And we've got a question here from you, Laura, don't you?
Yeah, so this is a frequently asked question we get in Kronos Hub customer support. So about the 3 different types of article that you just described, which one is the peer-reviewed one?
That's a really good question, Laura. I think we have it written down here somewhere, actually. The AAM is the peer-reviewed. So both the author-accepted manuscript and the version of record are peer-reviewed. The only one that's not peer-reviewed is the submitted version. So what happens a lot of times is after the author submits their article, it goes through peer review, and the peer reviewers might come back and say, I think you can accept this article if the author makes certain changes. So then it might go back to the author makes those changes, and the next version might be the version that the publisher said, yep, now that you've made those changes, I can accept it. So that's then the author accepted manuscript. So that's really important to point out, that whatever archived open access material you look at, it's not just somebody writing an article that has been peer reviewed. The only difference is the layout, the typesetting, and the references and so on.
Yeah,
The references are included, but typesetting. So this leads us on to then maybe summarize a little bit of what we've already talked about in terms of publishing open access versus archiving. And I just wanted to make sure people get that really clearly. So as I said, the final version of records, the final PDF, if it's published in open access, it's made available on the publisher's website immediately. There is no delay, and it's available free to read on the publisher's website, like we saw in the example. Archiving in open access, on the other hand, the action here is on the author, or in some cases, the institutional repository manager at an institution. It could be a specific librarian, but it's not the publisher who does this. Generally, it'll be the author who needs to put their author accepted manuscript in an institutional repository or a subject repository. And most cases, there is an embargo here, and an embargo means that you need to wait until the final version is live, and you need to wait for a certain number of months. So typically it can be 6 months or 12 months embargo. Sometimes there is no embargo, which is great, and you can do it immediately, but it's something to bear in mind if you hear the word embargo. And then this AAM, the author accepted manuscript, is accessible only through this repository, and it could be that the version of record of the same article is actually available in closed access, and we've got an example of that later on as well. The other distinction is that publishing open access, the final version is always under an open access license. I'm going to talk a little bit later about licenses in more detail, whereas archiving, generally, there's no license applied. And another major difference is cost. Publishing open access can come at a cost to the author, whereas archiving is in most cases free. I know of one exception. That's why there's something in brackets. There's always a generalization, there's always exceptions. But generally speaking, archiving open access is free and of cost to the author. So the costs that we're talking about are called article processing charges, or APCs in short. And this is a fee that the author pays to the publisher to make the article available in open access. And this covers things like running peer review, copy editing, typesetting, hosting the article in perpetuity on a dedicated server, as well as marketing. And this is generally paid after an article has been peer reviewed and accepted for publication. And in most cases, the publisher waits for this to be paid before it will actually be published. And to generalize that a little bit further, also to put in context with the closed access that we talked about at the start, a closed access article means that you as an author don't pay an article processing charge, but a library needs to pay to access it for their authors. So researchers won't be able to read it freely. Whereas if you publish open access, everybody can read it for free, but there might be a cost to you as an author. And our next webinar is focused on APC specifically, and there's different ways. I say now cost to the author, but in many cases now libraries pay these charges. There's a lot of transitioning happening, and who pays the charges. In some cases, it's also funders. So it's not necessarily just the author that has to bear that cost, but as an author, when you submit, you might see that as a cost. So it's something to bear in mind. The other thing to mention is that some fully open access journals don't charge article processing charges. So here's a screenshot from the Directory of Open Access Journals, DOAJ, and there we can see there's over 12,000 journals without APCs. So that's really a good place to look as well if you want to publish open access but don't want to pay any extra fees. And I've now just already mentioned the term fully open access journals. So before we go any further, I think we need to talk about what different journal types there are and how we can tell what open access options there is in each of those. So first of all, there is subscription only journals, which means these are journals in which there's only closed access articles. So there is no option to publish open access. Then on the other hand, you've got fully open access, like all the ones listed in the directory of open access journals. These are also sometimes called gold journals, and they are journals in which publishing in open access is the only option. So all the articles in that journal are open access. The complicated journals are the hybrid journals, where you've got a mix of both closed access and open access articles. And that's where, as an author, you often have to make a choice. Am I going to pay an article processing charge and make it available for everyone to read, or I don't pay, but then people have to read to access it? So those are hybrid journals. And as we already mentioned, archiving is an option for closed access articles. So articles that are published in closed access in either a subscription or a hybrid journal can be archived and made open access in that way. So again, it's not publishing open access as such, but it's openly available. There's also some other models like subscribe to open or diamond sponsored models that we're not going into so much detail during this webinar. And then we can summarize really what different types of open access there are. And I've touched on that really. Is hybrid open access is if you publish an article open access in a hybrid journal. Gold open access if you publish your article in a fully open access or gold journal. And green open access is what we've been referring to as archiving. So if you take a closed access article and make the author accepted version available in an institutional repository. In some cases, this is also the final version of record, the final PDF that you can make available. And you can also do the green open access route as well as one of the other two open access routes. So an article could be published open access in a hybrid journal, but also archived in a repository.
So this is a question that we get asked. I would say this is one of the most frequent questions we get asked in customer care. Researchers would like to know, like, what is the difference between publishing through a gold route, which a journal might offer, or publishing in a gold open access journal. So the question that we'll often get is, I would like to publish in a journal that offers a gold route. Is this the same as a gold open access journal?
That is a good question, Laura. And it all comes back to definitions, I would say. I would say publishing gold route only refers to if you publish in a fully open access journal.
Yeah.
A gold journal. But some people refer to publishing open access in a hybrid journal as gold open access as well. Specifically, some publishers put that language on their website. So you have to be really careful, especially as a researcher, if your funder mandates that you take the gold route or you publish in a fully open access journal only, to make sure that, you know, that language is consistent with what the publisher states. Definitions are really good, but like, unfortunately, there's all these nuances that, you know, different people can still refer to something in a slightly different way. So yeah, I would say it's not, publishing open access in a hybrid journal is not the gold route.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can sometimes tell. So when you're on a journal page, usually the publisher may offer gold access, but gold open access, but then it will also offer subscription only. And I think sometimes that's a way to tell. So if you're kind of looking through the documentation about the journal and the options that you've been given to publish, you will, if there's more than one route to go, it's probably worth digging a little deeper to see if the language is consistent, like you said, with what is actually presented. So there might be something offering gold open access, but then you might also be offered subscription only where you can archive. So you need to be careful there. I would say that is probably a hybrid journal, and you need to do a little bit more research, like reach out to your funder, maybe talk to some colleagues and see what they think as well, and also use some of the resources that we will tell you about later.
Yes, thank you, Laura.
Okay.
So this is, again, I've mentioned this actually, but just to summarize again, is some articles that are published in closed access could be archived in open access. And we've got a little example here of a closed access article. It's published with Nature. I can see here access through your institution bio subscribe. I can only read the abstract. It looks like text, but if I scroll down, that's it. I don't get the full article. And in this case, I've gone and just Googled the title to see, can I see this in a different way? And indeed, the first one is on the Nature website, but I can see the other two refer me to repositories. And there, indeed, I can get access to the archived version. So the same article, but it's a different version. One is the final PDF that's closed access, and the author accepted manuscript available archived open access. And this is to confuse everyone just a little bit more. No, I'm joking. I find this again online, and there's the reference there. And I thought it's quite a good visualization of what you go through as an author and what choices you can make in terms of your publishing journey. So as a researcher, one of the first things you could do when you identify a journal and you want to consider the green route, archiving your article, regardless which way you publish it actually, is you need to look at the publisher's website, where it tells you what you can do in terms of archiving. Is there an embargo, for example? Do I have to wait 6 months or 12 months? The other site that's quite helpful is Sherpa Romeo, where you can get information on the self-archiving options and any restrictions on versions. So that's something you might want to check. And then you have a choice of publishing open access, paying an APC in a fully open access journal, the gold OA route, which gives you immediate open access via the publisher. Or you publish in a subscription-based journals. And here you've got two routes. One is then the green route to make it open access, search for a repository, self-archiving it, and it could be either immediate or delayed, depending on publisher policy. Or if it's a hybrid journal that allows open access, you can choose to pay an APC in the subscription-based article and make it also immediately open access via the publisher. I'm going to have a quick look at questions just now before we move on to the next thing. And we indeed have two questions related to predatory journals. What is a predatory journal? And are there any resources available to check if a journal is predatory? There's resources available, such as Think, Check, Submit. You might want to look at that. I can give you some advice. But generally speaking, if you look at like a predatory journal is a journal that is not published by a reputable publisher, and that is basically a fake journal, I would say. So if you look at the journal website, you would see that the editors aren't real people. There aren't any real email addresses. Usually you should be able to look up an editor and they have a position at a university somewhere, and you can look them up on that university website and find information on them. So for predatory journals, that's usually not the case. They can promise quick publication. They can promise publication after a fee, but that's not the same as an article processing charge. So Think, Check, Submit could be a resource to look at and how to avoid that. But if you go with well-known publishers' names or look at the directory of open access journals, they also vigorously check which content goes in there. There's also various lists on the internet that you can look at, like white labeled lists.
We have a question as well in the chat from Dustin Anderson. Is there a reliable way to tell if an article is AAM versus just a submitted version?
I assume, Dustin, you're referring to in a repository, whether it's the AAM or the submitted version. It should say which version it is. I can't remember if we had that example, one of the other slides. But Sherpa Romeo would also tell you which version, if your question is about whether you're allowed to put it in a repository, it would tell you which version you can put in. So sometimes it can actually be no embargo for submitted version, but it could be a 12 months embargo for the AAM, which has been peer reviewed. But also the publisher's website is the other place to look at to find out, what exactly you can do with which versions. Anything you want to add to that, Laura?
Nope, there's no more questions in the chat at the moment.
Okay, great. So then let's move on to the last piece of definitions, which is open access licenses. I've mentioned earlier in terms of the difference between publishing open access and archiving open access, that publishing open access comes under a license, whereas archiving generally doesn't come under a license. Again, there's some changes happening in that area that authors request that they have licenses applied to the AAM, but I'm talking here in quite general terms. So the open access licenses that you might come across, they're CC licenses by Creative Commons, and we could do an hour-long webinar only on these licenses, so I don't want to go into too much detail, but just for people that might have never come across this, we'll point out the most obvious ones. So on this chart, you see from most closed to most open at the top. So the most common license that you'll see is CC by Creative Commons Attributions License. And this lets others distribute, remix, adapt, and build upon your work, even commercially, as long as they credit you for the original creation. And as we go further down, the rights become more and more restricted, and there's different combinations of things that are added here in the acronym. So SA refers to share alike, which means that if you apply the SA license, anyone who reuses your content has to do it under the exact same terms. So use the same license. Then we've got NC, which stands for non-commercial, which means other people that reuse your content cannot benefit in any financial way, any commercial way from that. So, for example, you wouldn't be able to, let's say, create an anthology of open access articles and sell it. Under CC BY, you could technically do that, whereas if there are articles under CC BY NC, you can't do that. The other one, and here then you have a combination of non-commercial with share alike. The other acronym that you see is ND, attribution non-derivatives, which means others can use it commercially in this case because there's no NC, but it cannot share it in adapted form, which means, for example, you can't translate. You also can't do text and data mining. So it becomes more and more restrictive, and the most restrictive is attribution, non-commercial, and non-derivatives. So to bear in mind, this conclusion really, CC BY is the most open license that you'll come across and that you might want to ask for and look out for if you want to publish open access. A lot of funders require CC BY, but some will allow other licenses as an exception. And if you're keen for a very open license and the publisher doesn't offer it, you can always ask for that.
Okay, so we've got another question that we get often in customer care, and I can also see that in the chat we have a couple of questions too, which doesn't surprise me. We do get a lot of questions about licenses. So the first one, which is quite a common question that we get in customer care, is, do I need to be worried about plagiarism if I choose a CC BY license?
No, you don't. I mean, that's a short answer. Plagiarism refers to somebody copying chunks of your text and presenting it as their own. So without giving any credit to you as the author, the original creator. So even under CC BY license, if we go back to the definitions here, even the most open license, you have to credit the author for their original creation. So if you publish in CC BY and somebody copies your text and tries to submit the article under their name, that would be plagiarism, and they would be find out there's different systems that detect plagiarism. So in a way, no license protects you from plagiarism, right? Someone could, even if you publish closed access, somebody else will be able to read it through subscription and they could copy from it. So nothing protects you from it, except for detection services that are out there to catch people. But equally, it's not that CC BY would encourage it.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think it actually protects your work, because there is a responsibility for the person or the people or organization using your work to credit you. Yeah.
Of course, and you want credit as well. You want references as something that you want, right? You want people to quote you, but legally and give you credit rather than copy it illegally, which is what plagiarism is.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the second question that we often get answered, and which can cause quite a lot of confusion for researchers, is the publisher offer their own open access license. Is this the same as a Creative Commons license like the ones you've just described?
No, it's not. Unless you see these Creative Commons logos and labels, it's not a Creative Commons license. So it's hard to say whether it's the same. I assume it's not the same, because otherwise the publisher would be using Creative Commons. So as mentioned earlier, you can request it, I think, if they have their own license and you want to insist on a CC BY license, that is something you can do.
Yeah, and I think most publishers, if they are offering an open access license, they will offer a Creative Commons license alongside their own version. So their own version might look a little bit like a CC BY license, but it does not come with the additional sort of protection, I think, of the Creative Commons licenses. Yeah. Okay, so questions from the Q&A about licenses. Are there any specific licenses connected to the different journal types or OA types?
No, I don't think so. Generally, I would say publishing gold in a fully open access journal has CC BY, but I've come across publishers that offer this and it's not CC BY, but one of the other CC, ND, for example. So not necessarily. No, you still need to watch out for that. I would say.
Yeah,
I think hybrid tends to maybe be more restrictive than fully open access. But it's a bit all over the place.
Yeah, always that thing. Just make sure you check.
Yeah.
Okay. And we have a question from Inma. What copyrights have subscription-only journals? So, for example, can we use the images of an article if they do not have a CC BY license?
I mean, if they don't have a CC BY license, what license would they have? So there should be some information on the image. If the image is under copyright or not, you need to write to the copyright holder and request permission to reuse it, or state how you want to reuse it, or in some cases, pay a fee. If you want to use images in general, I believe there's ways you can search for images that aren't under copyright or under an open license that you can use openly. And that might be a better way around, but all images should state under what license terms they can be used.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the questions that we've got from the Q&A there about licenses.
Great. Yeah, I can't see anything else either.
No.
Great. Well, keep them coming with the question. We'll keep an eye on it and fit it in as we go.
Great questions so far.
Yes, thank you. And we've got another poll next.
Great. Okay. So I'll just share that with you all. So have you published articles in open access before? I can see the results coming in. We give it a couple more seconds. We've almost got everybody.
Great. I can't see that part.
No.
The question, but I can't answer the question.
Feels very exciting. Okay. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's share the results.
Okay, so we've got about a third have published open access before, and 2/3 haven't, 30%, 70%.
Great, that's really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, what we want to talk about next is a little bit about the reasons why authors publish, and it'll be great to hear from you why you published open access, those 30% that did, or if there's any other reasons that we've missed here. Generally speaking, I would say there's two reasons. One is a mandate, or one is the other is the author choice. So a mandate could be you're funded by a funding body that requires you to publish open access. Your institution where you're affiliated with has a policy that requires you to publish open access or archive open access, or there's a national strategy in your country or the country that you study in that requires all research to be made publicly available. And the thinking behind that is generally that if you are funded by public money, or your research is funded, or the institution that you work for, the research should also be made publicly available. And a funder specific webinar will talk more about this in detail, but there can be quite tricky distinctions between funding policy and funders' payment eligibility. And I know you come across this quite a lot, Laura, don't you? But it can be things like the funder might request a specific license, like CC BY. They can say an article must be in a fully open access journal, in a gold journal, will not pay any APCs if it's hybrid. And also sometimes there's a cap on how much they will pay. So they will only pay for, let's say, an APC up to $2,000, and everything above that, either the author has to pay or hopefully the publisher will drop the price down. So that can be reasons why authors publish. And the other one would say is because authors want to publish, they want their research to be open. And that comes with a number of benefits. We've talked already about the benefits to readers, because don't want any barriers to access. Anyone from around the world can read the published access. And also there's no subscription costs for libraries, most importantly. So there's absolutely no restrictions, as we saw at the start, no technical barriers, no financial, no legal barriers. But there's also benefits to authors, because it means wider readership of your articles, more engagement, because more people will read the research. And with that greater exposure, you get more downloads, more citations, more references, and more impact, which is generally what you want. And we've got a question here. What are the disadvantages of open access? We haven't thought about that. There's only advantages. But one disadvantage could be the cost, because we have talked about article processing charges. And if you don't have any funding and your institution doesn't pay anything, it could be a cost to you as an author, although there's different waiver programs depending on where you're based. But I think that is a disadvantage. I think sometimes it can also be confusing, and I wonder if that puts people off if you're not quite sure which route to take or which journal, and maybe you're actually pushed into publishing closed access just because that's the easier solution.
Yeah, or the most financially easy solution as well. Like you said, if you don't have access to funding to publish open access, then that's a disadvantage. But there are ways around that, as you said, archiving. Yeah, exactly. So you could publish closed access and archive your article, even if it's not immediately, and then it's still openly available for others to read later. Absolutely. I don't see any disadvantage in that. No. Then we'll move on to some resources that we've promised to leave you with. Here we've got some links, and like I said, we share these on our website that will help you find open access content. So if you're looking for material to read,
you're not affiliated with an institution, you don't have any subscriptions, you just want to do some research, you can visit any of these and find information. And usually there's a way to filter to see only open access content. So for example, Directory of Open Access Journals only has open access content. And then you've got some other resources that have more archived resources, archived articles, or green articles. And then we talked a little bit earlier about finding open access versions of closed access articles. So this is if you know exactly what you want to read, you have the title of the article, and unfortunately it's published behind a paywall. As I tried when I set this up, you can Google it and you'll probably find a link to a repository that finds you that exact title, and it's the AAM version, so the author accepted manuscript. But I also really like the unpaywall browser extension, and this screenshot in the middle here shows how that works. I'm here on the website of the publisher, and I'm looking at the closed access article, and I've installed this browser extension, this little green button, and if I click on that, I'm taken straight away to the AAM document. So it's quite savvy. I quite like that.
And also, I was going to add to this that you're librarian. So you may have an institutional librarian who is specifically trained, maybe somebody else on the librarian team as well. That's another fantastic resource to use. And also with the DOAJ, that's a great place to go and check. So when we were talking earlier about the difference between gold open access and a gold open access route, if you're in any doubt, the DOAJ will likely tell you whether or not the journal is gold open access. And if it's not listed in there, then it's likely that the gold route that's offered is in a hybrid journal.
Yeah, that is true. Though I do know as well, there's publishers who, for some reason, not all their journals haven't quite made it to DOAJ. So if it's a new journal, that could be a bit of a lag. So bear that in mind.
That is true.
Because there's quite a rigorous process. You have to have ISSN numbers to get into the DOAJ. So there's a bit of a delay, especially if it's a new journal.
Yeah.
And what you said about the librarians as well, that also goes really for these kind of resources here. If you, as an author, you want to publish and make your articles available open access. So we've mentioned Sherpa Romeo already, to check what you're like to do in terms of archiving. Again, publishers' website's quite good, or your license agreement, your author agreement that you've signed if you have published in closed access will tell you that. And then if you want to look specifically, you're looking for a journal to publish, you're not quite sure where to publish, you want to look for journals with open access options, look at publishers' websites. So the journal listings are split into fully open access and hybrid journal lists. The DOJ, again, can also be a good source to find journals to publish in. And then feel free to have a look at the Chronos Hub Journal Finder, where we've got 46,000 journals from across different publishers. And you can filter by subject area, but also journal types such as gold, fully open access. And you've got some information about archiving and licenses in there already, as well as costs. We've got a few questions here, which is great. Can I make an article open access if I published it in a subscription journal in the first place? So you should be able to archive it open access, or go the green route, although there might be a delay. So let's say if you published in the first place and it's 6 months ago and you're now thinking about making open access, you should check the agreement that you signed with the publisher and what the policy is, and then you could make it available in a repository. And you can do something called retrospective open access. Some publishers allow this as well. So I think it depends a little bit how long ago you published it. Some publishers actually make closed access article available after a certain period of time. So after 12 months, there's no fee and they just make it openly available. So it really depends on the publisher. So I would recommend having a look at that specific journal and the specific publisher. I hope that answers that question.
Okay, so we have some more questions in the Q&A.
if you're forced by your funding agency to publish open access, maybe you cannot publish some papers because you cannot afford them. Yes, but usually your funding agency, your funder would cover the cost of publishing open access. That is one of the things they would do. So they might fund your research, but you might have a separate amount of money that you can use for publications. So if they demand open access, they would usually allow you to use that money or have the special pot of money to use for that.
Yeah, or we'll provide guidelines about what route that you can go down. Yeah.
Yep. Provocative question. Why should I pay more than both as an author or as a reader, considering the existence of Sci-Hub? Yeah, we haven't mentioned Sci-Hub, the elephant in the room. For those of you who don't know, it's an illegal site where you can access articles for free. I don't know. Obviously, I know I've heard a lot from authors that, you know, use Sci-Hub even though they technically can access closed access articles legally because it's easier. And that's a real shame on publishers and, you know, authentication systems, I think. But generally, I think we work in the scholarly communications industry, and publishers are there for a reason because they bring value. They make sure the quality is good. If we only have Sci-Hub and no publishers that control that, then where does research end up? So I think we need to support what's there as an ecosystem, and yeah, I think it's still important. And that's why everything's shifting at the moment towards making things more openly available and using the money that's there in the most effective way to get there without resorting to illegal resources.
Yeah.
The idea of reducing costs for the libraries is doubtful. Will they stop buying access to nature, science, etc.? So will we be paying twice for publishing and for reading? Maybe we could have set the scene here a little bit more, but what's happening at the moment with the transition to open access is that libraries and consortia are looking at what are they spending in terms of paying for access and what are their authors spending for article processing charges, to specifically make sure what this is not happening. This paying twice is what we call double dipping. So a lot of libraries are signing what's called publish and read agreements with publishers like Nature and so on, which means it covers the cost of accessing and the cost of authors publishing. So there is no additional cost. So that's really for authors that are affiliated with an institution. So there's a lot happening in their area to reduce costs for libraries, not necessarily to have more costs for authors, but to have everything streamlined on the one kind of payment flow. So I'd recommend to contact your librarian again about this. And they're a great resource, and they can probably tell you in which journals you can publish without any additional costs. And again, there's something we'll talk in more detail about the upcoming webinars. This was really meant to be the introduction to get all the jargon and definitions out of the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll be going into more detail about that in the fourth webinar, which is in May. But we'll give you some more information about that as we wrap up.
Okay. There's a question here for Anne-Marie Hanf. Do we get an official document indicating the license? As an author, yes, you should have signed something. So there, I think this was in relation to checking on what you can do. And that license usually states specifically on which license it is. Is it CC BY? But if it's a different license as well, it should tell you what others can do with your work and also what you can still do with your work. And if you retain copyright, or if you've signed copyright onto the publisher, which is another whole topic I've not talked about. Interesting question here about the problem of quality. Conventional publishing motivates the journal to increase the quality. People pay for reading good quality. With open access, the journal pays for publishing, so they're interested in publishing. The more, the better. That's not entirely true. So if we're talking about predatory publishers, yes, they want to publish, the more the better, the more money they get because they charge a fee. But for open access, it doesn't, the fee has nothing to do with the quality. So the people that set the fee, for example, and even the people that take the fee from you are not the people that make the decision about whether your article will be published or not. Editorial decision is very different from the finance people. And some publishers have like a whole waiver scheme, and you can apply for a waiver, and the people that make the decision about that, nothing to do with the people that judge the quality of your article. So I think the two are very separate. And it's a really good question to bring up, and we should make that quite clear. Also, journal metrics are still affected. So you still want good quality because there's some higher ranking open access journal, lower ranking open access journal, the same for hybrids. People look for good quality. So it's still really important on where you want to publish. So it's not just the more the better because I charge more APCs, and you still get rejected even if you submit your article to an open access journal. I think we talked about, there's one about how Einstein could not have published his papers because it wasn't open access, because if he needed to pay. I think we talked a little bit about the disadvantages of paying for open access, and how...
Yeah, I was going to say, like, in response to that, we definitely would have encouraged Einstein, if he could not pay for the papers that he wanted to publish, he could either check with his funder to see if they will help pay for the papers, but also there's still the archiving route. So you publish behind a paywall, and then you are able to put your article in a repository maybe after an embargo period. Or there's diamond open access as well, where you publish for free. You publish open access for free. So that could have been another option for Einstein.
Yeah. Thanks for that question.
Yeah.
There's an off-topic question about what research activities we do at Kronos Hub. I would say we don't do research activities as such. We're a hub that connects institutions, funders, and publishers, and helps streamline the open access publishing process. So as an author, the most useful resource is the freely available journal finder, .kronoshub.io, where you can search through 46,000 journals that you might want to submit to, and there's links directly to the submission systems.
Yeah.
So that might be helpful. I'll see one more thing. It's not a question.
Yeah.
Let us know any other questions. We've got, oh my goodness, only 7 minutes left before we wrap up. So if there's any more questions, let us know. We've made reference a few times to the upcoming webinars. We designed a series of 4 because it's just too much to talk about to fit it into one. So the next webinar, 31st of March, what's up with APCs and how do I deal with them? So we'll dig into more detail in that. Then we have a specific one, 21st of April, on funder requirements. And the 12th of May, open access agreements. And we've talked a little bit about that as well, the shift, not paying double dipping, and so on.
Yeah. And you can sign up on our website, kronoshub.io/events. And then also on our website, you can find recordings of the previous webinars as well. If you want to go back, if you want to share with anybody, they are there and they are available for you to use as a resource.
Yep. I'll put that up next. Our email address, or my email address, is on there as well. If anyone has a question they think of later and they want to contact us, please feel free to drop us an email.
Yeah.
And any other questions, I would say come in now, or contact later.
Yeah. And also, if we come together again for the next webinar, which is on the 31st, maybe you might go away and think about some things and come back. You can always ask the questions then as well. We're absolutely happy to answer them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great. Well then, thank you so much for attending. Thank you, Laura, for doing this with me.
Thank you, Romy.
And I think you have to hit the end webinar button.
Thank you very much, everybody. It's been
Bye,
great.
everyone.
Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.
Bye-bye. Take care.